Here's Christoph with today's episode.
Hey, business storytellers, how's it going? Thanks for joining me. We are live again, Amazon, Twitch, Facebook, Periscope, Twitter, YouTube. I think that might be it. And of course, you can listen to us on all the podcast channels out there. Why not take advantage of all this wonderful distribution? And while we're talking about distribution, podcasting is really just like radio. I mean, it really is, right? I mean, look at me. I got this mic. I got a face for radio, even though you can see me. But, you know, that's kind of how it goes. Traditional media, where I grew up, still matters today to many businesses. You get somebody to write about you, people still read it. You get somebody to have you come on the radio, people still listen to it, believe it or not. You know, you go on TV, people still see it. I know we watch TV every night. We're not going to talk about what channels or anything like that, but we watch sports, we watch the news, we watch, see what's going on. So today I want to talk with Dawn Dugle. She's going to talk to us about why media coverage still matters. She wrote some books on the topic. We got them highlighted on Amazon Live right at the bottom. You can buy them there. That reminds me, I need to put on the thing here, unmute to hear me. I know some of you guys like to listen to me on mute. I don't know how you can hear me. You can't, right? It's like watching a radio show on TV with closed captions, except we don't have closed captions other than Facebook, maybe. Okay, so let's get Dawn on the show here. She also grew up in journalism, so I'm always happy to connect with people that have that same background. And let's hear what she has to say. Let's hear how we can get media coverage and why does it still matter today? Dawn, how's it going today?
It's going well. Thank you. Glad to be here.
And thanks for joining me. We connected on Twitter. I'm trying to get rid of this unmute me thing at the bottom here. I'm playing producer, everything. Producer, director, host, coordinator at the same time. I don't have enough hats. So we connected on Twitter. You wrote about media coverage. Tell us, why does the media coverage still matter?
Well, you know, you talked about traditional media, and over the last probably 15 or so years, traditional media has really expanded. You know, what is traditional anymore? It's not just TV news. There's not just the newscast of record at 6 o'clock at night or 10 or 11 o'clock at night. You've got all kinds of ways to get news out there. And local journalism, local newscasts are the bastions of what's going on in a community. They're the ones that are keeping track of what your lawmakers are doing, how your money is spent, how your tax dollars are spent. They're not always TV news. It's radio. You've got podcasts. You've got digital news. There's all kinds of avenues to share that information. And as an informed consumer, really paying attention to that tells you what's going on in your neighborhood. And that, you know, the platforms might have changed over the last couple of decades, but the reasoning behind it haven't. You want somebody that can go in there and ask the questions that you don't get to ask as a regular person at home. And that's why local journalism and local news still matters, in my opinion.
Yeah, and definitely no argument from me at all. I mean, I listen to the radio, and I actually, when I go on the radio, people tell me they heard me. Even though they're not commuting, right? I've been in this place, in this spot, in this chair for the last, 11 months. I haven't left.
I spent some time at a radio network, a very conservative radio network. And from time to time, they would have me come on and talk about storytelling in business or social media. And it was a statewide network. And I was always surprised by the people who would text me or email me and say, I heard you on such and such. And I'm thinking, that is not the radio network I thought you would listen to. Like, it was really interesting to me. But they were covering another angle of issues that other media outlets weren't. So it made sense to me. But yeah, radio reaches like 95% of Americans listen to radio at least 92%. 92% of Americans listen to radio at least once a week. So, I mean, it's still viable. Local news, still viable. And that's a good place to be when you're in business.
So what's interesting, first of all, my opinion always is, like, somebody wants to talk to me, I talk to them. You know, I always have something to say, even if I can't tell them everything. I mean, you know, God forbid that something bad happens or there's a PR disaster or whatever, but I always can say something.
Yes.
Right. And that's always my opinion. I'll give you an example. One of the local clubs here, they were open during COVID and everybody else closed down. And the media came by and I said, absolutely, we need to talk to them and we can tell them things. Now, there's some things we don't want to talk about necessarily, but there's other things we can talk about. For example, people can make their own choices. If they're worried about it, they don't have to be here.
That's right.
They should wear a mask. I think at that time they didn't have a mask mandate yet. They do now in that city. So how do people wrap that around their head that it's always good to say something of some kind, and the no comment doesn't look good ever, in my opinion? How do you feel about that?
Oh, I love to talk about no comment. And I'm always fascinated when I see regular people a camera shows up and they put their hand in front of it like they're Madonna. I always think of Madonna and Sean Penn when they would like punch out camera, they no comment and paparazzi. And it's like, no, you're just a regular person. You need to calm down. Like, just simmer down. You're not Madonna or whoever, is today, or J-Lo, or now I'm really totally dating myself. But anyway, the thing that I teach a lot of PR people about how to handle the media. And when I talk about media coverage, there's two types, really. It's the kind that you want to get, the good kind, and then storytelling in a crisis, which is when you're dealing with the media rolling up in your parking lot and you didn't invite them there. They're there to get a comment about something. And, you made a good comment at the start of the show about how you're chief cook and bottle washer with your podcast and all your shows and all the buttons you push. And that's really how journalism is right now. You've got reporters and journalists who are doing many, many things. They're writing, they're editing, they're reporting, they're going live, they're posting on the internet, they're putting stuff on social media, and they don't have a lot of time to waste. But if you hold something back or comment them, they will drop everything that they are doing and dig into your past. And they will not stop until they come and uncover everything. My favorite, we would do that. I mean, I've done that many times. It's like, if you had just answered the questions we were asking the best you could, we wouldn't have dug into this other stuff and found all this corruption, that was going on behind the scenes. Now, I'm not saying everybody who's watching all have things that we don't want to be made public. They're private things. They're none of anybody else's business. So when you get asked a question that is in times when, the light doesn't look very good on you, there's always something you can say. And I recommend that for people who are in that situation, don't say, I can't talk about that. I can't talk about that. Well, what can you talk about? There's a great spokesman. There was a great spokesman in the Tampa Police Department in Tampa, Florida. And he would always just tell you what he could say. He would say, here's what I can tell you right now. And a lot of times it wasn't much, but he told a story. He told us what he could talk about. He answered questions the best he could. He would, talk, but he can't, because he understood the life cycle of a newscast. He understood that our next newscast was right now, and we have to put something out there, and people at home want to know what happened. So again, tell them what you can. Don't spend a lot of time talking about what you can't. Definitely no comment. You never want to lie to the media. Oh my good Lord. Don't lie. Don't cheat. Don't steal. It's like the 10 Commandments, really, but with media. Just don't do any of the bad stuff, and they won't go looking into what else you got.
And even if I don't dig into the no comment right away, at least it's in the back of my mind, right? Even if dodge that bullet today, they'll remember down the road. Oh my goodness, they always say no comment, and you never know what might pop up. And the reality is, I mean, there's plenty of stories that people can pursue, right? And sometimes, especially in today's world, I mean, think about the live stream. We do a live stream like every day. There's a podcast episode that publishes every day. I put a lot of effort into getting good guests like you and others, but I'm trying to publish all the time, right? Yep. So at the end of the day, if some guests, they make it so difficult for me to work with them, right? They need to have 5,000 questions before they can ever commit to a time. They have this and that, and they want to have 15 prep calls. I'm like, guys, I don't even do 15 prep calls when I fly to Singapore to give a keynote. And you want 15 prep calls to talk about a topic you wrote a book about? I don't think so. We're not a good fit.
And the funny thing about all this is that when I'm in front, because I also speak to groups of people, and I was doing keynote speeches before they closed down conferences. We'll do those again, and I've done virtual ones. But what I always hear from the room, and especially from my PR peeps love to fight on this one. They're just like, oh my gosh, I got my PR handbook over here, and I'm going to fight you on this. And I'm like, okay, you can fight me all day long on this, or you can actually get your story on the news. It's really up to you. And telling a journalist that something is not a story, this was something that I would hear all the time. It's like, well, that's not a story. Somebody would come to you and they'd say, well, I want to know about this. And you'd say, well, that's not a story. That is not for you to determine. That's actually for them and the audience to determine. And if they have determined it's a story, they will tell that story with or without you. And it would behoove you, it'd be in your best interest to have a say in it. And I've dealt with a lot of difficult subjects in this matter. It's like, I couldn't get a spokesperson for a mayor on the phone to save her life. And I finally got to the point where, it's kind of like know your audience. And for those who have kids at home, you know how you get your kids to do stuff. You kind of have to talk to them the way you need them to do it. And I would leave messages for her and I'd say, hey, I'm posting this story in 30 minutes. It is right up your guy's alley. He campaigned on this issue. It's a good story, I think. But, if he doesn't want to be part of it, so be it. But you got 30 minutes to get back to me. And by God, every single time she'd call me back within 5 minutes. And it's like, I shouldn't have to say those things. You should recognize a good opportunity when it comes to you. But, if you're missing out on that, and I think that there's also this idea that the media is out to get every little guy, like they're trying to get the little guy. And it's like, no. They are trying to fill, in many cases, like 14 hours of news a day, plus 24/7 on the internet. I keep saying the internet, the web, online, like I'm 100 years old. Well, those whippersnappers with their websites, they're trying to fill all this news and they need content, and they are going to tell stories about stuff with what they have, whether you are part of that or not. So it really comes down to what's in the best interest of you and your business or your organization. How are you telling that story? What are you saying to them? What can you say to them? And there's always something. And, and being respectful of that so that they'll be respectful of you. And that's really the key. I mean, besides a flight attendant, I think, and cops right now, I think journalism is such a thankless job. I've never had anybody say thank you for covering a story. Like nobody's ever said, gosh, we're really glad that you barged in here and shined a light on this corruption. Thank you so much for doing that. No, nobody, I mean, they're always grateful we did it, but nobody ever stops to thank a journalist, but that's okay. Yeah, we used to do it for other reasons.
Not even the public. I think sometimes the public doesn't realize how important journalism truly is, right? Because who else is going to cover these things that are happening out there? Of course, we also have B2B journalism. That's a little bit different, but same thing, right? When journalists want to talk to you, be ready, have something to say, be available. I remember it was somebody who, I don't remember what they were even calling me about, but they wanted to talk, and she texted me back and she said, I got to run, do something quick. Can I call you at 9:30 Eastern, which of course is 8:30 Central. So not super early, not super late, but pretty late. And I said, of course, you can call me. And the other thing people have to remember is just because they talk to you doesn't mean that you will get coverage, right? They're talking to all kinds of people. So just something to keep in mind. Don't necessarily bother them. When is my article running? When is this running? How do you feel about that? I think just turn on a Google alert. I mean, you can see when something runs.
Oh gosh. I used to, I'm really a smart aleck down deep. I really am. It's one of the, I guess, the defense mechanism when you're looking at the worst things that people do to each other every day in the news. And one of the things that used to drive me absolutely bonkers was when there were two things that would happen. If you're in the middle of breaking news, inevitably that's when all the PR people are calling a newsroom and they're asking about their press release they just sent you. The entire world could be on fire and they're asking about the dog and pony show they just sent you a news release on that doesn't happen until 2 weeks. The other thing that would happen is people would send me resumes, and then they would call and say, did you get my resume? And I'm thinking, you're wanting to be an investigative journalist and you don't have the wherewithal to make sure that we're not in the middle of a blizzard that has completely shut down the state. Maybe you're not smart enough to hire. And I mean, it just used to drive me crazy. But it's that whole, like, in my career, I got 2 million emails. I averaged it up before I wrote the book, and I'm like, okay, how many emails did I get? Like, I get about 300 emails a day, 300. And I can tell you right now, I never read most of those because they were too long. They weren't sent to the right person. They were sent in the middle of breaking news and we were covering something else. And that's really kind of key to that, is really knowing when to send something. We would get news releases that would be sent at 4:30 on a Friday, and then what would they do? They would send this press release about something terrible going down, 4:30 on a Friday, and then the spokesperson would turn their phone off and go away for the weekend. And I'm like, curses, they got us again. And we called it the trash dump. That's when, and you'll see it too in business where people will like try to get these things off their to-do list on a Friday, and they're sending out 14 emails, one after the other. And you send that on 4:30 on Friday, nobody's reading it. And it doesn't do you any good. And so the trash dump people, by the way, because again, not just a hat rack, fool me once. I figured out they would do it every 2 weeks. They were doing it every 2 weeks. And so sure enough, after the first 2 times it happened, I was like, all right, I'm on to them. There's a pattern. We're going to get them. I sent my photographer down. I was like, all right, we're going to do 2 photographers. One's at the front door and one's at the back door. And I want you to catch this because inevitably something's going to happen. And we're going to need a quote. And we need it on video. So stake them out. And sure enough, they sent the email. I texted my guy. I was like, I don't know what door they're coming out of, but get them. And boy, were they surprised to see us. Sticking a mic in their face. Now, this is somebody who's trying to dodge the media. They're a public person. And, we react to that a little differently. When you're a journalist, you react to that differently than you would like a regular Joe Schmo. But I will tell you from them, I did that again. Like, I was like, look, you want to hold on to you want to control the story. And if you're going to send this out at 4:30 on a Friday, you believe I'm going to show up for all your edits. So it's up to you how you want to handle that. These are things that affect hundreds of thousands of people, and you do need to speak about it. You can't just send an email and be done with it. That's just not how it works. So anyway, again, that's a totally different, that's public person. That wasn't,
that wasn't a business.
Owner.
But it is interesting because, people used to do that all the time. They send things at different times. And of course, now media companies just adjust, right? When something happens. I mean, the TV stations, they're on air all the time. They have to fill all kinds of spots.
Yep.
So people are always available. Let's see. We have a comment here. Amanyet Aurora on Amazon. This is great. Glad you're live on here. I haven't seen this before. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you can follow. Click that button right up there. It's super hard to find on Amazon, unfortunately. I don't know if they do that on purpose or not. So I'll be quite honest. For most of my journalism career, and even today, and I'm still a little bit of a journalistic storyteller, but I do very little with news. A news release, they don't go to the top of my list. You know who goes to the top of my list? When I think you sent some kind of tweet about something. I don't remember what it was, but I said, I need to talk to Dawn. Let's see if she can come on the show. But you didn't pitch me, right? You didn't send me a news release. You didn't send me anything. We were just connected. And I don't have time to read some of these news releases. So what's the succession or the success rate of news releases? I mean, who uses them?
Oh my God, this is my favorite topic of all time. I mean, when I told you that PR people want to fight me and want to meet me in the parking lot, like this is the number one thing that I get arguments about. I get total pushback on press releases, news releases, whatever you want to call, story releases, whatever you want to call them. in 1950 whatever, there was a book written and it had a template for a news release, and it had you put the date line on there, you write it like a story, you put your CEO's quote in it, it's 3 paragraphs long, and then for more information, you put your phone number on there. Well, that is not how news releases are going to get read today. Nobody has time for that. You said it yourself. And I teach my businesses, like, if you have something to pitch, it should have 3 bullet points. So you're going to want to write this down. 3 bullet points. What is the story? You should be able to tell that story in 1 sentence. The second sentence should be why it matters to the audience of whoever you're pitching it to, the station, the podcast, what have you. And number 3, what video and audio, what elements are you going to make available to tell that story? Now that should be at the top of your email. 3 bullet points. What's the story? Who does it affect? And what sorts of elements can you offer to tell that story? Now, if you want to put more information in the body of the email, which is what I recommend, like, there might be more information to, like, a little bit more about the story. But guess what? Nobody's taking your news release and putting it on their website. They're not putting it in the newspaper. They're not reading it on the TV anymore. That's just not done. And oh, by the way, if you sent your news release after the fact, you didn't send it out in time, that's not a journalist's problem. That's your problem as the PR person. You should have gotten ahead of it. So when I tell people, like, 3 bullet points, that's it. Stop sending news releases like it's 1955. And when you Google news releases, you get a gazillion of the wrong example. It's just not, Google hasn't even caught up with this yet. It's like, look, you want it. And so my PR peeps, they were like, oh, let's step into the parking lot. Let's fight over this. I'm like, no, you can fight over it, or you can get your story in the news. And it really is up to you. What would you rather have? And there's always somebody that their CEO will fight them. They love seeing their quote in the news release. And I said, that's fine. Write that news release for your website. Put that on your website. Let that be part of your news releases as a company. Don't pitch that to the news, the traditional news, the journalists that are out there today. So, like, I get really worked up about this. Can you tell? Like, I love talking about news releases because I've read so many that are bad. It's like, no. Stop sending those things. Nobody's reading them. It's the truth.
And it's okay to get worked up over, because there's a lot of bad practices out there, or best bad practices, or whatever.
I just get worked up because there's so many good stories out there, and there's so many good stories that get overlooked. And that's one of the reasons they get overlooked, is because the news release didn't get read. It's like, what a shame that is, that you've got a great story, but nobody's going to tell it because you didn't pitch it the right way. And I hate that for those guys, because there's so many good stories out there. So many.
So what's interesting, I was talking to a prospective client a while back, and as you can tell, prospective, so we didn't move forward or anything. And basically they said, oh, let's do a test run, which is usually the first red flag, because when people say, oh, let's do a test run to see if we like how you do a strategy, I'm like, you have to pay me to do that. And then they said, oh, why don't we do a thing where you can see if you can get us media coverage, and if you do, you get paid. And I'm like, but you can never guarantee it. Plus, there's work involved to pitch it. I got to figure out what's unique about your product. Maybe your product sucks. No offense, but there's products out there that send news releases and they're horrible, right? Like, or whatever the story. So when people come, PR consultants or whatever, and I'm not really a PR consultant, quite frankly, but if PR consultants come to a company and say, oh, we can guarantee you coverage, is that just baloney, or how do you feel about that?
I would be very skeptical about that, because, the other thing that they were asking you to do, quite frankly, is they're asking you to trade on your relationships. When you're in PR and you're working on coverage with news media, building that relationship with the media is incredibly important. Knowing who to talk to, what sorts of stories they're looking for, letting them know that if they need a story that day, like Sundays are perfect in small markets. Like, you got a story, man, pitch it Sundays. They got nothing else to cover. And I've gotten a whole ton of stories covered on Sundays just because nobody else is pitching anything. They want to be Monday through Friday. So if you're willing to do Sunday work, fine. But when you're saying that somebody is promising you and they're guaranteeing this, and it's, they're based on a whim of a newsroom or the whim of social media, I'm like, that would be a red flag to me. But I don't know.
No, I'm with you on that, and I can guarantee your coverage, honestly. Through an ad, we can buy ads,
Sure.
but even if you buy ads, that still doesn't mean anybody will pay attention to it. That still doesn't mean anything, right? Your creative copy might blow. And my funny quick story on when it comes to ads, somebody says nobody's clicking on our ad, and I said, let me see the ad, and the ad doesn't even give a call to action. Why do people even know why they should click? Right.
It's like, what are they supposed to do with this? They're going to look at it. Okay. Challenge accepted.
Looks pretty. So I still remember when I was a journalist, I interviewed a murder suspect, and I don't remember. It's been a while, but I don't know if he confessed or what. But either way, I ended up in court, and I had to testify at the trial. And a police captain said to me, Christoph, so when you testify, say what you got to say and shut up. Period. Be done.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's the same thing when it comes, like, not podcasts, right? Because we're talking, we're not actively trying to get to 30, 40 minutes, but we want to fill some time. We don't just want to be done. But when you talk to the media, right, like, you have to talk in sound bites. You have to talk shorter. You can't, like, I'm talking, right? Like, I need to get that. What's the sound bite they're going to use? Because then people complain after the fact and they say, oh, they used the wrong soundbite. I say, well, maybe you said the wrong soundbite, or maybe you rambled. So how do you help people do that? What are your tips?
My tips for that is, and I can tell you why that happens, is if the reporter or the journalist or the producer, a lot of times what happens is they'll send a photographer out to interview you. If it's a big enough story, they might turn it, and very few stations now just have photographers. A lot of them have multimedia journalists, where it's a reporter-photographer combo. They do all their stuff. So they'll go out and do an interview. If it's good, they'll turn it into what's called a package. It's a longer story on the 5, 6, and 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock news. But even then, it's a minute, 15, minute and a half. And in that space, they might only take 2 sound bites from you. Guess which sound bites they're going to take? The shortest ones. In most cases, they're going to take the shortest soundbite, and then they might write what's called a VOSOT. It's where you see video and for the other newscasts, for the morning show, and you'll hear that soundbite run 400 gazillion times. And so not only have you said the wrong thing, you've got it rerunning. So what you do is you start with your story. What cost? When you are pitching an event, let me put it to you this way. If you can schedule it, it's an event. News people do not cover events. They cover the story that is behind the event. So why is this event taking place? What's happening there? Why is it important? Know those bullet points. Have 3 bullet points. I'm real big on 3. Like, what are the 3 things that you want to get across to this journalist? And then practice it. Turn your phone on and record yourself doing it, because guess what? They're going to record you anyway. You might sort of bring it out now. Like, a lot of people don't like to see themselves on camera, and they don't want to hear their voice. And so practice with that. The other thing is, and here's a little secret I'll tell you, and everybody who's listening and watching, if you would like to get a ton of free publicity for your business or your event, and by the event, I mean the story going on at the event, pitch the morning show. Most local stations have at least 2 hours. Some have 2.5, 3, 4-hour morning shows. And if you are willing to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, turn on these people, they'll do a segment every 15 minutes with you. Now, think about that. Like, every 15 minutes, they're doing like a 3-minute segment in a 4-hour newscast. That's like $6,000 worth of earned media, and all you had to do was get up early. That's it. As opposed to your 15-second soundbite that's going to keep running on the 5, 6, and 10, and maybe 1 or 2 people see it. So morning show is still a really good place. If you've got enough content that they can fill, and you've got a good enough reason for them to be there, they're always willing to get up. And you want to get up on a Monday morning? Heck yeah. Because guess what? It's hard to find Monday morning. I was a morning producer for years. And I was like, man, I would come up with all kinds of ways to get people to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning with us. And they always said yes, because it was a great show. And we had a great reporter we would send out, and he was amazing. But it's that whole thing. I can't believe that somebody would turn down $6,000, $10,000 worth of free publicity because they didn't want to get up a little bit earlier. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Somebody will do it.
Yeah,
somebody's going to do it. It might as well be you.
Right. So I think that the takeaway here, what I always talk about, is you have to be on the journalist schedule. You're no longer on your own schedule, right? So when the writer or reporter or whatever she was, when she said, "Can I talk to you at 9:30 Eastern?" Yes, that's my answer. When I was at United Way, we would go on the morning news all the time,
Yes.
Have the reporter come by. And I always found it so funny because, they would come by and they basically interview the CEO in front of the empty ballroom where something will happen in 6 hours. But still, we got the coverage, right? So
That's right.
it's a little interesting to do that. But yeah, be ready. Get on their schedule, share what you can. And then also, I always like to do the behind the scenes. I mean, we do that here sometimes. I take a picture of, I got the mic, I got the ring light now, the 4K camera, the iPad, blah, blah, blah. Here's behind the scenes. So do that too. Look, we're on whatever channel. Why not, right?
People love behind the scenes. They love to see how the sausage is made. They want to know where they can see your story. You can't go wrong with that. You really can't. Well, you can. Just tidy up. Just make sure that, just look through the camera before you post. Just make sure nothing's laying out that you don't want maybe your mom to see. Just throw that out there.
That's an interesting thing, because of course I'm just sitting right here, and sometimes I stand. That's the only thing I do anymore. I don't go anywhere, right? And I don't know when it was. Maybe it was yesterday. I was on a meeting, or I don't know. Maybe it was a live stream. And I look back there, and I'm like, what is back there? And I see it on the screen, right? And there's one of those vacuum cleaners is sitting back there. Nothing inappropriate. But had it been on TV, I would have, again, I should have probably looked before I went live or before I did that.
And we forget that stuff's there. I get so tickled. One of the things that tickles me so much is to see when, because I have a lot of realtor friends, and I see the homemade photos of homes for sale. And I always I am a storyteller and a story collector. So I'll go through these photos of the homemade ones where people have taken them with their iPhone. You can see them in the mirror, taking the photo, just like a gym selfie on a dating app. It's terrible. And my favorite one thus far has been a kitchen with all the cabinets open, and down on the floor was a can of Raid. And I'm just like, what is the story here? Like, we've already got all the bugs, so you're not going to have any problem with it. Like, that is not the photo that is going to get this house. And surprise, surprise, that house had been on the market for more than a year in a hot zip. Like, that house shouldn't have been on the market more than a day. So my friends will send me a link. So they'll go, oh God,